My next champion of change is a wonderful story that I'll tell you as soon as I get the slide up. But while we're waiting for that technology trick, I wanted to just go to a point that came to mind while I was talking about the economics of these individuals. And something that people don't understand is that solar is now the lowest cost capacity for creating electricity on Earth. Like I said, you can contract at 2 and 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Coal plants couldn't do less than 10 realistically, and they're not internalizing all the true costs like the asthma that they give kids and the extraction and ash deposits and all the rest of it that come out of that. Nukes way more than that, gas more than that. In Hawaii just last month, we saw contracts for solar plus storage, so batteries, so that you can use it when the sun's not shining, at 9 cents a kilowatt hour. So large-scale contracting in the state of Hawaii, a State of the Union, seeing 9 cents a kilowatt hour. Batteries, by the way, perform on the same learning curve as photovoltaics in terms of coming down that cost curve every time we double the production of them. So electric vehicles, which is another whole potential made possible by low-cost solar power, are driving the production of batteries at scale. Every doubling of volume, they similarly drop close to 20% in cost per unit for every doubling of volume. So solar plus storage is now sub 10 cents a kilowatt hour. An amazing fact, which means that if you were building a new power plant somewhere on Earth today, you wouldn't build a coal, oil, or gas-based power plant unless you had political reasons to do that. It's why, despite Trump's talking about bringing back coal in America, during his 2 years so far, more coal is shut down than any other 2 years in American history. And the Clean Power Plan, which he reversed, which Obama had enacted, was less ambitious in terms of the shutdown of coal than what has actually happened in the 2 years since then. So we're not only not just beating new build with new build, we're beating existing. And there's a reason for that in cost thresholds, and I'm happy to take this tangent while Mr. Maestro works out the technology piece here. Basically, the idea is that by the numbers on Earth in 2017, I haven't seen the 2018 numbers, we spent about $160 billion on Earth around the world in new coal and, in new wind and solar plants. Most of that was solar. So 160 billion, just remember the numbers. They're silly figures, but they're large. Coal, oil, and gas attracted $106 billion worth of new investment in 2017. We've actually been bigger than coal, oil, and gas since 2012 by the numbers. That's not well understood in the community, but you know, the alternative energy since I wrote that book has been coal, oil, and gas. Mainstream energy from a new build point of view has been wind and solar. Now what's happening is the cost is becoming so cheap that it's probably worth considering shutting down coal, oil, and gas plants rather than operating them. Kind of depends on where you are in your debt repayments. So basically, we have a situation where, for example, in Colorado, you got a bunch of coal plants that were built sometime in the last couple of decades. They're paying off bonds, and therefore they need to operate to earn revenue and sell electricity to pay off the bonds. But it may be better to build whole new wind and solar farms, make money, save money, and use that to repay those bonds and pay for the new power plants. So new wind and solar is better than old coal, oil, and gas. Sorry, we're just going to take a moment to fix this technology. Oh, what a shame. Sorry. There it is. Thanks. I guess just tap it every now and then. So the threshold that's been crossed in the last couple of years, which is going to cause massive disruption in energy economies around the world, is managers of grids and power systems are starting to reconsider running the stock they've got. because it may make more sense to mothball it early, not run it to its end of life, and just build a wind or solar farm. Because the cost of the fuel and the O&M on a coal power plant is greater than a new build wind and solar farm, which is a pretty exciting and incredible thing. Are we ready to go? Hoping so. Nope. Do you want to see if you can just do it, Matt? All right. Sorry about the technology trouble. While I'm here, does that cause any questions? Because I'm figuring that guys can edit the video. Yes, I see you with inquiry on your face. Solar. So what are the downsides to the solar? So, it's obviously a fair question, and it's an industrial product, which I'm talking about building at massive scales and deploying. But the good news is, I won't claim it's pure. I don't believe any technology can be pure as pure, but it's pretty bloody good. Effectively, the machine we're talking about that produces the electricity, the solar panel that you see in the photograph or on the roof, is a box with an aluminium border, a glass top, and a glass back now, some plastic sometime in the backing, and silicon cells, which are basically sand. That's what silicon's raw material is, and some metal doping and conduit, some wires, silver, and some other stuff. We took lead out of solar panels more than a decade ago, thanks to the European toxic standards. There's not a lot of toxins in the panels themselves. There are in the production process. They use some chlorine, but that can be a closed-loop manufacturing process. And even the power supply going into producing the solar panels could be solar power. So you could have these breeder plants where you use solar electricity to make solar panels and get to a really clean loop. The reality is we're not there yet, but the payback on energy is about 2 to 3 years now, which is a remarkable number. So, these things will probably work they're warranted for 25 years, i.e. sunlight will fall on them, they'll make electricity for 25 years. We think they'll probably work for a lot longer than that, call it 100. We don't really know because we haven't had them in the field that long. There are other things associated with them, the power electronics, the wires, the mounting systems, metal and other things. So, in the production, there are definitely issues, and in the extraction of the rare earth materials, there may be issues in the battery space, which I work on. There's issues about supply constraints in some of these metals, cobalt, for example, coming out of the Congo. So it's not all ideal. But if you look at the history of fossil fuel production over a century, if you've ever been to a coal field, if you've ever seen mountaintop removal, if you've ever been to the Niger Delta or Colombia or these places that have been sacrificed for oil or coal, it's very small footprint stuff by comparison, and it doesn't produce climate change nor air pollution. With the electric system's a whole nother matter, but I'm sort of assuming we'll have electricity going forward and want to keep that. Another question? Cloud cover will impact. The question was about cloud cover and chemtrails and other things covering solar production. It can reduce the amount of insolation or sunlight getting through to the panels, but really it's not significant. We're capturing a different part of the spectrum, and we get this question in San Francisco a lot. The fog does reduce the production across the course of a year by about 3%. Just if you know how foggy San Francisco gets. So the question is, what's going to stop the oil and coal industry and others from sabotaging this because it could eat into their business? I think that's happened. historically. I could tell you chapter and verse stories of interference and obfuscation is what I call it, the sort of fear, uncertainty and doubt that's been thrown at this. It's all too small for prime time and all these sorts of things. But that was sort of history. Most of them are either acting like a deer caught in the headlights and looking at the Mack truck coming to kill them, or they're trying to jump on the truck. They're trying to get on the program. So Total, the giant French oil business, Shell recently has started a renewable new energies venture fund. They've said that, in their long-term planning, they think solar will be the predominant system, but they put it at 70 years from now, whereas if we wait 70, we're all screwed. So, it has to happen in 10 or 20 years, basically. The NG, which was GDF Suez, the Gas de France, the giant gas producer in France, has now committed itself to 100%. They're all trying to turn the Titanic, but it's a bit of the innovator's dilemma. Can the incumbency make the shift to the new technology is a question which we're still a little out on. My view is no, which is why I spend my time with entrepreneurs and not with large-scale incumbents. If you look at this digitization and low-cost disruption that microchips and Moore's Law have brought to the media industry, to newspapers, to movies, to television, we're seeing something like that in energy and electricity and electric mobility. EVs are going to eat Detroit. They're just not moving fast enough to keep up with what is a better consumer product that costs less. And they're going to be left behind, and you and I are going to be driving Chinese automobiles in a decade as a result. You heard it here first. I'll take one more question and then just go back to my slides, even if they're not working. The question was, does the efficiency of the panels keep up with the growth? The efficiency tends to improve a little bit, not nearly at the rates of growth that we're seeing in the product. But this efficiency question is always a little bit of a red herring for me, if you'll forgive me. We're probably on average about 15% efficiency in photovoltaics these days. Some of them are 20+%. The goals are around 30%. Some people theoretically think we could get to 50%. But let's just break that down for a second. We're talking about the conversion of photons, light from the universe, into electrons. And we have a machine that sits passively, without any moving parts, and converts 15% of those photons to electrons, day in, day out, for 25 years guaranteed, and probably 50 years. So let's just think about fossil fuels for a moment. What are fossil fuels? They are photons from the sky, the light from the universe that fell on Earth hundreds of millions of years ago and was converted by photosynthesis into plant material. And then those chemical bonds in those plants were captured and trapped in fossils, coal and oil and gas, underground by the sedimentation of the earth as it evolved, and buried. And that sunlight has been buried for 200 million years, and now we go around the earth and we dig it up with Tonka trucks, and we excavate the earth, and we burn it to release those chemical bonds. So those photons' energy is released in the action of burning. But that's not actually how we capture them and put them into electricity. The genius, or maybe not, of the early electricity era was that we used a steam turbine. So we cause Brownian motion. We boil water. So you burn stuff, very inefficient, incomplete combustion, to boil water, very inefficient, wildly inefficient, to drive turbines that spin to create electricity current that goes into these wires. Because the burning and the steam generation is so big and polluting, we have to stick those power plants a long way away. So we put the power and electricity into a transmission line, which loses some significant percentage, these days maybe 10%, of the electricity on the way to the market, and then gets stepped down into our homes and businesses and lives. Whereas what I'm telling you is that I got a machine that sits at your home or your business and in your life and makes power 15% of those photons into electrons. The calculation, I've tried to do the maths on that, it's by comparison an efficiency of 0.000000000000000015%. Like truly. We've waited 200 million years to tap the sunlight, and now we do it by burning stuff and boiling water. We've got a better business model. That's all I'm saying. So efficiency, it gets better. Technology gets better as you make more of it. That's a fact. It's an iteration cycle of technology. We're developing these things all the time. And they're already incredible machines. With that, I'll just go to my other slides, if that's all right. Or rather, I'll just talk. Okay, I was going to show you some pictures of some of the people, but I apologize for the technology problem. The number 4 character that I want to tell you about, Leandro Lagarde, is a champion of change from the Philippines. This company, SolarPhilippines, that I advise, has basically disrupted the power system, literal and figurative, in that country. 120 or so million people, some of whom have good electricity service in the city of Manila, most of whom who don't. Some have 6-hour power, they call it, where they get electricity sometimes, but not the rest. And then a lot of people don't have electricity at all. They still live very basic lives without it across the islands of the Philippines. This young man read this book in 2012 while he was at Yale University. One of the bits in this book is about a friend of mine who started another company who dropped out of Yale to start that company. And so this kid reads this book, age 21, and says, well, if that guy dropped out of university to start a solar company, I'm going to drop out of Yale to start a solar company. So he calls me and says, I'm dropping out to start a solar company. Can I come and visit you? And I'm like, oh, damn, I've destroyed this person's life. I didn't mean to do that. And so Leandro came to sit with me and some friends at the Powerhouse, this incubator in Oakland. Here he is. Thank you for getting that going again. And learned like a sponge, unbelievable alacrity and ability to understand business and procurement and distribution and costs and how to run a solar company. Went home to the Philippines. I thought, good luck to you. See you later. 6 months later, he calls me. He says, I've built my first megawatt. I'm like, a megawatt? Are you kidding? Took me 10 years of my life to build a megawatt. And the first one, at least. And so it goes. This young man has built a company over the last 6 years that is the largest in the Philippines. He just at the end of last year sold a 64 megawatt power plant to KEPCO, which is significant. It's the Korean energy power company, the largest coal and nuclear company in the region. Their first major purchase of a renewables plant outside of Korea is his power plant in the Philippines for a large sum of money. He has hundreds of megawatts, 500 I believe, in his sort of immediate plans, and has 5 gigawatts of potential in his pipeline. And the reason I mention this is I believe it's why the Philippines energy market is changing as we speak. A year ago today, January 2018, there were 5 gigawatts of coal plants being proposed for regulatory approval in the Philippines. The Philippines government realizes they have people without power or reliable power and low-cost power. A bunch of coal vendors were coming into the country saying, we'll build you a coal power plant. Here's our bid, here's our proposal. You would need to approve it. It goes through a big permitting process and so forth. In the meantime, Leandro sold this 64 megawatt power plant and built some others, signed contracts with Meralco, which is the main utility in Manila, and some others. And as a result of that, showed that you can buy power, in his PPA's case, at about 6 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's his cost of bringing all this together in the Philippines, and that's what he's contracted to do. The pool price, the wholesale price of power in the Philippines from coal generators is 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So he's 2/3 the price, call it, of what the coal guys can do. Today, January 2019, there's only 1 gigawatt still bidding to build coal power in the Philippines. 4 gigawatts have been taken out of the regulatory approval process. They know their days are numbered. New versus new, they no longer win. It's better, smarter, cheaper to build solar. This kid started a factory to make the solar in the Philippines. He's got several hundred employees making the panels in the Philippines. The cells are still made in China, but he's manufacturing assembling the modules in the Philippines. So he's making his own panels in the Philippines with Filipino employees. He's making power, literally, for the people in the Philippines. He's also started a side business, because he has so much time, called Solar para sa Bayan, solar for the people, in the Tagalog, the local language. And it is basically to serve these communities on the outer islands and the poorer provinces of the Philippines who don't have good power supply. There are municipal utilities or co-ops of kinds that serve these towns and villages. They're often publicly owned, run by the local political class, and they tend to be pretty expensive and pretty sloppy service. Diesel-based, because they're on islands, it's easy to ship diesel in at small scale to these islands. And this is where the 6-hour power population lives. So the first one he did, I visited in Mindoro Occidental, which is the poorest province in the Philippines. I was there last May. And town of 20,000 people, they had this terrible diesel system and poor power supply. He built a bunch of solar, 2 megawatts, this is the power plant the photo's in, and a Tesla battery bank, sort of out of the car factory in Reno, Nevada, and now provides 24/7 electricity for less to that town of 20,000 people. I talked to the local shopkeepers. They said, oh, business is better because retail stays open and the drinks stay cold. I talked to cops who were saying crime was down in the town because the street lights work. I talked to a woman who claimed that there was a lower fertility rate and less children being born because parents had light at night and screen time was detracting them from that business. But I doubt her testimony, to be honest, because it was only like a few months after this power system had been installed in the community. But anyway, it was a signal of what can come when you bring electricity to one of these places. And Leandro's doing it at incredible scale and speed, built a $100 million business for himself, which he owns 100%. Zhali is another case that I love to talk about. A woman who grew up in the poorest parts of China, I think Hebei province, at the bottom of the pyramid. China has done a remarkable thing in the last couple of decades, bringing the population of the United States out of sort of almost a feudal existence into sort of some sort of urban middle class existence. But still, there are many hundreds of millions of people in China that live pretty basic lifestyles. And she was in one of those communities. She got away to Beijing as a teenager, got some education, and then got to Shenzhen, one of these new super cities in the south that's come up in the last 20 years, and there's the manufacturing center of the mobile phone phenomenon. All your iPhones, all your Androids, all of them made in Shenzhen. She worked on production lines there for over a decade herself on the line. She showed herself to be creative and ambitious and good as a worker, and ended up leaving that life and starting her own factory. But turning those skills of the production process and the mobile phone experience and that mass production to the problem that she'd grown up with, which was burning wood and coal and kerosene at night to have light in her house. The bottom of the pyramid existence, which still besets 1 billion people, some of whom are still in China, and wanting to bring electricity to them. And so her business, Shenzhen Power Solutions it's called, is one of the top 3 makers of solar lamp products in the world. And she is making at scale solar lighting and lamps and cook stoves and all sorts of kit, which she designs, and she's an amazing product designer, partly because adversity is the mother of invention and she knows what's needed, and she goes to Tanzania and she lives in the villages and she experiences their conditions and she thinks through design and lifetime and the product robustness and all the needs. And she's making it. Her products are the most ubiquitous lighting solutions in Ethiopia these days. It's a brand called Universal that if you went there you would see. And she's co-operating her own company. As her workers stay with her on the production lines, they receive ownership of that business. And she's giving something back as a philanthropist and an entrepreneur who's had great success in her life, but is trying to do something better with this opportunity called solar power. And then my last story will be about my friend Brett Isaacs, who's the CEO at Navajo Power, which brings us back to America, but an America that not a lot of us understand exists, which is a community of a couple 100,000 Navajo, largest indigenous nation inside the United States, has a treaty, has sovereign rights, and yet are some of the poorest people in the world, if not America. 15,000 families here don't have electricity. And if you know anything about Navajo, it's been the battery, so-called, of the Southwest for decades. The Hoover Dam, the big hydroelectric power systems run through Navajo country, and there are at least 4 massive coal power plants, and there have been more on the res for decades, and uranium was extracted there as well as coal. So they've been the power servers for Phoenix as it's grown, and Vegas as it's grown, and Los Angeles as it's grown, and all the cities and towns and the states in between for decades, and yet they've benefited very little. The Navajo Nation, aside from some compensation payments for pollution and problems created by these energy extraction industries, have really not benefited from much of this. Brett has had a business for 10 years of putting solar home systems into these families that don't have power on the res. So small solar electric solutions for sheep herders and grandmas and others that live in fairly remote distributed communities around the reservation. But now he and his partners have teamed up to build something called Navajo Power, which my organization, the California Clean Energy Fund, has been backing for the last year or so, which is to build gigawatts of power using solar panels on the reservation to not only power the local community and use the revenues to benefit the local community and the jobs to benefit the local community and the ownership to go to the Navajo Nation, not to outsiders, but to power the West again with clean power. And what we're basically doing is we're flipping the paradigm of stranded assets and screaming about the fact that coal is no longer profitable and the Navajo generating station is going to go down because it just can't compete in a world of wind and solar, to an opportunity, which is that we're going to convert the transmission capacity to ship solar electricity instead of coal electricity to markets around the region. There's 30 gigawatts of high voltage power lines off the reservation. I mean, it's appalling. You got high voltage everywhere on this beautiful sacred country, and you got families underneath that have no electricity. But we're going to take that capacity and we're going to flip it and turn it into a business for the Navajo Nation to benefit from and own most of, to build power plants that they can control, that will have a 35-year lived life, that will not require the excavation of the earth under them, the sucking of the aquifer out for the processing of them, or the pollution of the sky and the causing of climate change. And Brett is driving that vision. He's the big guy in the middle there in an incredibly intelligent way that I believe will be one of the big news stories of the solar ascent in coming years here in the States. So that brings me to sort of the end, and I highlight these cases of entrepreneurs, but I really want to say that it's about all of you and not just individuals. And I don't need heroes. I don't need these people to do this work. It's great that they do, and I want to highlight and tell their stories, but I want everyone to be involved in this fight. It is the fight of our lives, of our times. This is the most important work of this century. We have, for reasons of history, caused a big whoopsie. We're changing the climate. Electricity was great, beautiful thing we did. The internal combustion engine, mixed, I would say. But we have to not use fossil fuels to run our power systems and our mobility services anymore. We have to get out of the car fueled by fossil fuels. We have to get on the bus and get with the program of switching out wind and solar at scale from dirty energy systems today. We're doing that work, but it's going to be an heroic effort that's going to take more than just a few individuals. It's going to take all of us getting behind them, engaging with them, educating one another about this transition, buying it, preferring that service just as you prefer healthier options for yourself in your life, making change in the industrial agricultural systems by opting to be vegan and so forth. We should be opting for community CSE, community-supported energy. And that would be the sorts of stories I've told you here today of these entrepreneurs and their changes. We do this as a daily job. We build incubators and accelerators. We run funds. We invest in these companies. We back them. We train them. We connect them to supply and mentors and resources that they need to succeed. If you know people like that, let me know. If you want to learn about more of this, let me know. If you want to get involved in this, get into the new Energy Nexus online at energynexus.co. Contact me at this email, and please get involved in the fight, because the Rooftop Revolution, this decade of rapid resistance to the status quo, the turning of the time, will lead to a period of opportunity and potential that may be able to reverse some of the worst consequences of climate change, certainly, and will at least be able to allow 100% of the community to benefit from 100% clean energy in the centuries to go. The world is not going to end. As bad as global warming is, and I believe it to be truly bad, it is a world without end that we live in. There will be a civilization 1,000 years from now. We've only been burning fossil fuels at scale for a couple hundred. A couple hundred years from now, we'll look back and go, oh, that was crazy. They used to dig sunlight up from underground when we can just take it fresh from the sky. But who they will be and what condition they will live in, that depends on us now in this generation. If we turn the tide on climate change and its causes, now we can stop the worst of it, and we can even start to reverse it. But that depends on all of you getting behind the Rooftop Revolution and the Solar Ascent, getting involved in this new Energy Nexus work, and helping to support this struggle. Thank you, and shine on. Steve, I took a lot of questions. Should I take a few more? Yep. Okay. So one in the middle, the gentleman in the hat.
There's one thing about, is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. It's one thing about all kinds of technology, whether to what degree it has been considered, that there's a kind of an arrogance in assuming that traditional peoples are people that we assume are poor because they're living on maybe earth grounds, they don't have this and that. We deem that they're deprived of technology and televisions and devices and all these kind of things. And yet when I've had the privilege of visiting primitive tribes and cultures, the hallmark is that they're happy. They engage with each other and they're happy. And then we bring them with all this technology, we're solving them with EMF waves that disrupt brain waves, with injurious content. Children nowadays, evidence is coming out, they can't recognize emotions anymore. I know a family where they get together at Christmas, two families, and the two equal age boys, they're just zombies. They're each in their own device, and at night they get together and they play a game, together looking at some kind of a game. They're not engaging with each other. It's not normal. It's not something that's going to be...
What's your question?
Well, has it been considered, instead of just assuming that we're going to give these indigenous, these poor people, these deprived people, technology that's not going to make them happier? They're happy as it is. And a lot of indigenous people want just to be left alone. And at the cost of giving them some little labor-saving device to give them all this other stuff, next thing you know, they're going to want more and more material. What's the question?
So I guess my answer to your question is yes, I think it has been considered, and I hear you and I understand, and I've also had the privilege, as you said, of living and enjoying and working with Indigenous communities, some of whom, as you said, wish to be voluntarily isolated. I've actually worked closely with some of those, most of whom do not have that ambition and do seek some of these adornments of modernity, if you will, and I think worry about we Westerners romanticizing their subsistence affluence and actually want some of the labor-saving devices and some of the things that you and I take for granted, like electricity. Certainly, I believe, some basics like electric light at night is a thing which, I'm not going to recoil from offering to everyone that I can get it to, because everyone likes light at night, but indoor air pollution kills millions. Kids are coughing and hacking and cancer cause from burning dung and wood and kerosene, which is their option in most markets. Having electric light is clearly a blessing for them. And And, likewise, the education, information, opportunity to do business, which most cultures do, that is availed by electricity, I think is significant and shouldn't be underestimated. So I'm with you. It should be prior informed consent always. It should be with a precautionary principle at its heart, any of these changes. I'm not for development in terms of selling shit and Facebook and corruption and stupidity and pollution to people, but I am for providing for basic needs. We educate children, we protect women from abuse by putting light in villages, we change demographics, all of which you could argue are benefits and the communities seek. But there are trade-offs in this world, and that's true. And again, to answer your question, yes, it is considered. The enterprise has begun, and we're trying to minimize the risks to go with it. I think this lady was first, and then you, and then you. And I'll get back to you. I'll try to be quicker.
Thank you. And I want to ask if you have a website we can use it and have more knowledge.
Yes, the website I would recommend would be the EnergyNexus.co is a good one. Depends on how deep you want to dive. That's really about the entrepreneurial work we do. If you search Rooftop Revolution, Danny Kennedy, my name and the book title, I think you would find a website there. My Twitter feed links to a whole lot of relevant stuff. And I have a website called The Solar Ascent, which is also full of this sort of content. And I update that all the time.
Hi, thank you. Are there any adverse health effects for being around solar panels, having them on your home, or any of that on our biology?
Are there any adverse health effects to having the panels on the home? Not that I know of. I mean, again, the electricity question has been raised here with the EMF and so forth, but it's actually at a pretty low voltage from the panel level, no is my short answer. I think there was a question here and then up the back there.
What is it that really stopping our government to see really the light in doing so? And is it the businesses that are stopping them? Are they so powerful that they're overlooking it and they're saying, okay, I mean, we're not going to,
Yeah.
we're not going to we are not going to go to a good alternative because we are looking for the well-being of all these huge companies that are making money. So
the question was, what's stopping our government from seeing the light
Right.
and doing this?
And then one more thing is, if we're looking at China, China is building a huge plant, I think of, I don't know how many, probably millions of megawatts. They actually just started it this past year. So
And then China, the big question. So, what is stopping our government from adopting this at scale? Fortunately, I live in California where we are doing it at scale and have decided to, and there is a signal from the very top through the legislation that was passed last year called SB 100. We will be 100% renewable power system and 100% decarbonized by 2045 by law. So, yeah, not soon enough, but there's law that says do this, which is a strong statement of intent. As to why is the rest of this country confused about this future, I think you nailed it. It's the interests of the corporates that have successfully capitalized on coal, oil, and gas for a century or more. You name it. The corruption in America's democracy is often largely funded by oil and coal interests. The Koch brothers are a name that is familiar with the campaign finance debate. They're a gas and oil pipeline giant. You know, that's how they made their billions and fortunes. And, you know, we could go overseas to Saudi Arabia. You know, why does that family get to be royalty and run that place? So we have seen that unfortunate concentration in the hands of the few who have used it to extend their power base, literal and figurative. And it's a great shame. You know, the sad story for the United States is we invented this technology in 1954 at Bell Labs, just down the way in Jersey. Yeah, we created this technology, just as we did rechargeable lithium-ion batteries. But to your point about China, guess who's taken the mantle and is leading the way and has made a decision also very clear, like California's. We're doing this. Theirs is a very geopolitical rationale. They don't want to be dependent on American or Russian or Venezuelan oil. Those places are crackpot countries. They want to own and control the means of production that will power their electricity and mobility services going forward. And guess what? They're doing it at scale. When I said we're going to put in 127 gigawatts in this year of PV, yeah, China will be 30, 40 gigawatts of that. They were more last year. They're actually having a down year. They're cooling it off a little bit. 50 gigawatts in a year. This is a technology we invented just over 50 years ago. We might do 10 gigawatts in America. We are sleeping, and nothing comes to the sleeper but a dream. And you know, we have this American dream, make America great again, but meanwhile, the world is moving on. Like I say, EVs, you haven't even imagined the options. There were 179 electric vehicles at the Beijing Auto Show this year. You go to the Detroit Auto Show last month, it's sleepy, boring, another F-150, whatever, you know? And these electric vehicles perform better, they go faster, they have better torque, they are way lower cost of ownership, way lower cost of refueling because electricity is cheaper than gas, et cetera, et cetera. The benefits are enormous. And in my view, electric vehicles are a downstream benefit of the solar ascent. They are enabled by the massive production of low-cost clean electricity coming out of solar. That's the future. China is going to dominate it if current projections are anything. They've made that decision. We are, meanwhile, bragging about becoming the biggest oil and gas producer, just as oil and gas is peaking.
How do we address the big users, though? The rooftop users are one thing, but even the electric cars that you're talking about are still powered by coal and nuclear. The big users are the cities, the skyscrapers, not the rooftops, and the giant users are the giant ships that are moving from China to the United States and back, and how I got here from California. I didn't drive. Sure. I didn't walk.
Yeah, I mean, get your point and appreciate it. I do just small amendment, if I may. The big users can be solar powered too. These massive solar farms, upstate New York, outside California on Navajo reservation, they can power your skyscrapers and your cities and your major power loads. In fact, you know, think about this. The 5 largest companies by market capitalization, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, you know, a couple of $1 trillion companies there, they're all either 100% or committed to 100% renewable power. You know, MGM Grand Casino, big load, like think about all the flashing lights and the bells and whistles. They just negotiated with Warren Buffett's NV Energy to get off the grid, the coal power, to get onto a solar contract direct. They paid $80 million for the privilege of disconnecting from the grid so they could just have a direct line out into the desert to a power plant. There's a lot of big loads that are being served 100% by wind and solar. Like I said, California has a law that says we're going to do this in 20 years. That's the 5th largest economy in the world. So there's no technical problems to the big ground-based things. I'll give you shipping and aviation. That's a challenge. Shipping, I reckon hydrogen is a good place to look. So when you have low-cost solar power, what can you do with it? We do this all the time in California now. You have a problem. We curtail, it's called. In Europe and California and China now, there's a lot of this going on. Like on a Sunday when no industry's operating, you got too much wind blowing and too much sun happening, we literally shunt electricity into sand. In Germany, they split water into hydrogen and oxygen. H2O. And they put the hydrogen into gas pipes and they enrich the calorific value of the gas. We could use hydrogen to power ships. I think that's going to be a big industry in the future. Just the electrolysis of water to make hydrogen as a way to store the power of the electrons that are falling free from the sky. And then aviation is probably the hardest nut to crack, and it's an important one as a segment of climate emissions. It's growing very fast as humans fly more. But there are solutions, biofuels, electric aviation. In Los Angeles, there's a hub of entrepreneurs and startups around a great incubator we work with called the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, and companies like Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and all those sorts of aviation industry players have sort of spawned this next generation of businesses that are looking at the electric aviation industry. The first off will be light planes, you know, the sort of milk run services, which America has thousands of these flights, go to islands in Hawaii and Catalina and here in New York and wherever. Those little planes, a gas engine rattles those planes to death. Every 6 years, they have to change the engine out and fix the airframe. You replace the engine with an electric motor or two, so you have a redundancy, so you're safer. You have the same power, better torque, lower cost, no fuel. The batteries take the place of the fuel tank. You got electric Cessnas in the sky in the next couple of years. Think about drones. You know, aircraft that have been pioneered by the military. The military aren't building jet engines anymore, they're building drones. So the future is electric. We are going to electrify everything that we can. We may not be able to electrify long distance flight and shipping. Maybe we will do shipping, but it will all be electric and it will all be solar powered. 100 years from now, I'll bet you $100. It should happen 20 years from now, and that's the challenge. If it doesn't, climate change will be worse than it should be. That's the struggle. We have to make this change happen faster rather than slower. That's why I want everyone involved. Thank you.